So Sarah LaPena, who is one of our animation leads, there we go. You should be able to see me. So she said, okay, somebody's having audio trouble. Hold on 1 minute. Oh, I suppose I couldn't hear that. But so she says this. She says, okay, the most important thing when I test out a facial rig for the first time is if your rig can't do this, then it sucks. And those are her exact words. And so I asked her to elaborate a little bit, and I said, you know, well, okay, I can say that. It's funny, but what do you mean? And she said, well, look at my face. If your rig cannot do those two extremes, if it's limiting me for whatever reason, you know, I'm an animator. I don't care about your technical limitations and all this stuff. I just need the rig to do this. And if it can't, it sucks because they're asking me to do this performance and I can't do it. And that's all I care about. And, you know, that was sort of paraphrasing what she said at the end there, but that's the way it is, you know. And it goes back to what I mentioned in the beginning about how you've got these two rigging philosophies that sort of clash, where you've got one, you know, a rigger who really wants to make the rig perfect and everything is built off the fax muscle system and every single movement of the face is exactly what happens anatomically, but maybe it can't, you know, what if the guy does some, you know, crazy shape with his face and fax doesn't do that? Well, all of a sudden you're screwed and the animator can't hit that. But then there's the other end of it where they've just got so much control that they just get bogged down. They've got so many attributes to animate and worry about and keep track of that you get lost. But even those things being said, you've got to be able to do this and this. You don't need to, you know, worry about all these special little wrinkles and this sort of stuff. You know, they help, of course, but you know, you don't always have the resolution in your mesh to do that. You don't always have enough joints or blend shapes, whatever the case may be. You know, we're all faced with these limitations when building characters, but the point is you have to try and don't forget to try, because like I said, a lot of people focus so much on, you know, all this that they're forgetting about this. They say, oh, the brows go up and they go down and the eyes blink. I'm done. Oh yeah, I got to make the eyes move around. You'd be amazed how often we see that when we get facial rigs. You know, probably a lot of you guys sitting there who are riggers are saying, oh yeah, well obviously you want the brows to be expressive and you want to be able to squeeze and all that sort of stuff. But I promise you, half the character rigs we get don't have fundamental movement abilities in the upper face. So, you know, they really wanted to drive home that point to anyone in the audience who may be a character rigger or an aspiring, you know, setup artist. Like, don't leave that out, because all the emotion in a performance comes from the upper face. You know, you don't need to see my mouth to know like what I'm thinking, and you know, all the emotion comes from here. Everything down here, it's important because you want it to look good, and that's, you know, you want to see good lip sync and et cetera, et cetera. But if you don't have emotion up here and you don't have things going on, then people are going to focus a lot more on the mouth, and then you have to like compensate for that because you know, they're not connecting with the character, so they're going to be focusing more on other areas that don't really matter, and that's when they start nitpicking and finding little things you didn't want them to see. And that's something our animation team runs into constantly. They're always saying, well, I can't make him look angry, so I have to, you know, try to make the mouth better because I know people are going to be looking all over the place for different things. Definitely ask me more questions about that if I'm not being clear, but that was like the most important thing I wanted to drive home. So the next thing, which kind of goes along the same lines, but it's a little bit of a separate point, is that don't forget to make your brows go down and to give your character the ability to look angry. If you guys have ever played a video game, which I'm sure everyone has, when's the last time the main character of a video game was not like an angry dude, you know, bent on revenge for some random reason? Of all the games we've worked on in the past 6 years or so, almost every single one of them, the main character makes this face the whole time. And then every once in a while he goes like this. And then sometimes he goes, you know, they're not happy people. And you know, if you're working on like say you know, a Pixar film or a DreamWorks movie or something more cartoony and more good-natured, then you don't have to worry about that so much. But you know, for the games people out there and for anyone working on a production with an angry character, make sure your character can be angry and converse with your animators. You know, don't oops, I didn't touch the screen for too long. Shut off. No, don't assume anything. Talk to your animation team. If you don't have a connection between your animation team and your rigging team, you need to make one. You know, talk to your producers or whoever, your production guys, and forge that sort of relationship between somebody who can communicate well on the animation team. Because it doesn't do us any good when the animator says, "I want this. Add 50 joints to make it happen." And you're like, "Well, I can't really do that," you know. And they say, I just need it to," you know. They get all angry with you and that sort of thing. You don't get anything done that way. You want to find someone who can communicate well to actually tell you, preferably somebody who's slightly technically savvy so they understand basic limitations and that sort of stuff. You know, find someone who can communicate well and communicate. And again, it's one of those things, it's common sense, right? But so many people don't do it. And they forget that, you know, we're building characters for them. Our jobs are to provide them with what they need to make a kick-ass performance. And if we're not giving them that, regardless of everything else, we haven't done our jobs correctly. You know, everyone's got limitations. They've got, you know, we've got memory limitations or time constraints or whatever it may be. They've got the same stuff. You know, and so many people kind of say, well, it was all I could do in the time I had, or it was all I could do within the constraints of this engine or this movie or whatever. You know, that's all true, and I'm not saying that it's not. But the bottom line is you got to give the animators what they need. And if you're not communicating with them, you don't know what they need. So you're setting yourself up, you know, for potential failure. So I'll stop rambling about that. But make sure the brows go down. Make sure your character can be angry. So hold on, let me pull up my character again. Okay, so with this guy, let's see. He's got some pretty rad blend shapes in here that I want to show you. Let's see if I can hide my controls. So this is sort of a, we developed a new system to sort of, it's actually, we call it a hybrid, but it deserves a more descriptive name. But essentially how it works is you've got blend shapes, and normally on a hybrid rig, or hybrid rigs that I've worked with in the past, you know, mostly, you've got a joint rig and then corrective blend shapes on top of it. And the mixture of these two things create, you know, what people refer to as a hybrid. Now in this case, it's cool because you've got blend shapes actually driving the joints. So if I find let's find a full face shape here. Here we go, face squeeze. Let's see what that does. So you'll notice that as the squeeze turns on, the controllers are actually following the mesh, which is super cool. So that allows the animators to use these blend shapes as their primary means of animation, but then go in here and say, you know what, he's squeezing a little too much. I'm going to tweak this or you know, move that sort of thing. And that's the kind of detail that they need when we're doing very super high quality projects. Oh, okay. Someone was saying that the refresh rate is extremely slow, so I'm going to hold the poses a little longer. So in this pose, sure, you've got a nice shape going on, but to give the animators the ability to push it even further and make small tweaks to it by, you know, doing this or whatever they need to do, you know, with controllers is really what you're going for. Now the method at which you get to that is not really in the scope of this in this webinar, and feel free to hop on the ImageMetrix forums and ask more about it. But the main point is that, you know, giving them that control is a good idea. Let's see, someone's asking. Matt's asking, did you use custom constraints to avoid cycle issues on the hybrid rig? And the simple answer to that is yes. It's quite a system. I didn't design it myself. Our rigging supervisor, John Riggs, did, and it's pretty amazing, actually. And as I said, it's kind of out of the scope of this talk, but I'd be happy to, chat with you about it later or talk on the forums. So let's see. Trying to undo that. There we go. So the next thing on my list here was still under the topic of don't skimp out on the upper face, is that make sure you give the animators enough range in the upper cheeks and the lower eyelids. Something very common that we see in facial rigs is the rigger sort of arbitrarily decides that something has a limit. They take this control and they say, okay, well, the human eye doesn't go further than that, or eyelid, sorry, so I'm not going to allow the animator to do that. Whatever reasoning you may have to provide a limit like that, even though to us it makes sense as technical people, and especially as people who study anatomy, a lot of times the animators are not going to care, and they're just going to be limited. You can't foresee the different ways that they may need to use that control, or different shapes that a human face may hit. So it's generally not a good idea to limit the range on controls. Now that being said, you don't want them to be able to go like this, because then that just opens up the door for them to to destroy it and to do extremely weird things. So to prevent that, what I suggest is you can make limits, but just make them whatever you think anatomically is going to be correct, push it a little bit further. I'm kind of on the fence about limits in general. I think I've always been on the side of, trust the animator. Trust that they're smart enough to not make the rig do that. It's not my job in my mind to babysit them and make sure that they're going to do everything perfectly. That's their job. Their jobs are to be good artists, and if they don't know to not, make the eyelid do something funky like that, then I can't help them. But what I don't want to do is limit them when they might need a controller to do something. So that goes the same with the upper cheeks. So if your upper cheeks only go this far, but they need it to go, this far or something like that, then that's a problem. It's common sense, I suppose, again, but don't limit the controllers if they don't need to be limited. Now, in this case, you just notice that the mesh broke at about right here. So maybe that's a reasonable place to limit it, something like right before it breaks, or maybe even a little further. But, a lot of rigs that we see, they only go this far. They go up a tiny little bit because that's what the rigger supposed the face, that's what they thought the face should do. And what happened was the animator said, well, I need it to go here, and it can't. And that happens all the time with different facial controls. So I would always recommend to, when you're at that sort of stage where you're finalizing the rig and you're putting limits on things and that sort of stuff, or maybe it's in the beginning of the process when you're designing what certain controllers are going to do, definitely keep that in mind. That if you're not an animator, I know a lot of character artists are, which is nice. You have that perspective. But if you don't, if you've never animated and you're not sure what they might want, then don't make assumptions, because most of the time, it's going to come back and bite you, and you're going to have to make adjustments. Or they're just going to keep their mouths shut and then not be able to do the animation they really want, which is even worse, I think. So that covers it for the upper face portion.